The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I had some discussions over the last few days, over the weekend, with some friends and some people I met, I guess we'll call it in the real world, not on the show. And there were a few people who said to me, I'm feeling guilty because as soon as I meet someone who says I voted for President Donald Trump, I'm judging them and I'm feeling guilty because I'm judging them. And I'm here to tell you that it's fair to judge every single person you meet that voted for Donald Trump. And the question is, judge them for what? And I hope if you're going to respond to this segment, you're going to respond to what I actually say and I'm about to say rather than what you think I'm saying, because I may not be saying what you're hearing. So let's really explore this, okay? You can learn a lot about my ideology from my rejecting Donald Trump in the election, right? It's fair to judge me because I rejected and didn't vote for Donald Trump. I don't believe the U.S. is well served by having a buffoonish reality show clown in the highest position of power. You can judge me as thinking that, as believing that based on my vote against Trump. And you can accurately know that I don't respect Donald Trump's style of politics. I can reliably judge every Trump voter as voting for Trump for some combination of the following. And again, I'm about to give you some categories here. Not every single one of these applies to every Trump voter. Number one, yes, they could be genuinely bad people because, and that's why they voted for Donald Trump. They want to see others suffer. This is the minority, right? But that's possible. It's possible. There's people in the alt-right, including, not everybody, but including racists, xenophobes, Islamophobes, etc. If you're someone like that, Trump was definitely your candidate in 2016. We have tons of polling and survey data that confirm that for us. Of course, not all Trump supporters are bigots, but if you're a bigot, you almost definitely voted for Donald Trump in the 2016 election. Number two, some Trump supporters, voters, are a combination of selfish and ignorant in varying proportions, right? Selfish because they think electing Donald Trump will help them specifically. Probably not true unless you're already quite wealthy, as we figured out. Or ignorant because you don't realize that Trump won't help you. You are believing or you've been bamboozled by Trump into thinking that and don't realize it. So that can be a combination, a blend, so to speak, of selfishness and ignorance. Number three, you might actually not be ignorant, right? You understand everything about Donald Trump and you understand the impact that Trump's proposed policies will have on different groups in the population, income groups, minority groups, etc. But you voted for him anyway because you actually have something to gain personally, right? Some kind of quid pro quo, your business will benefit, something like that. And voting for someone solely based on that is something that we can judge as people in the world. You might not even judge it negatively. And this is the key and why I said react to what I'm saying, not to what you're hearing, which is it's fair to judge Trump voters, but the key question is judge them for what? Maybe Trump will drastically decrease taxes on the rich or big corporations, and you're in one of those groups, and that's why you voted for Trump. No ignorance at all. You completely understand what Trump's proposed policy effects would be. And number four, you're not necessarily concerned only about yourself, but you think that Trump would be better for this country than Hillary Clinton would have been, but you don't understand a lot of basic concepts, right? These could be economic concepts, foreign policy, trade. You totally get what Trump is proposing, but you just don't understand many of these concepts, and thus you don't get that the ideas espoused by Donald Trump would be a disaster for the United States if he's able to do everything he says he's going to do. And hopefully we're all praying here, I'm kind of joking, but we're all hoping here that he's not able to do that. That's probably the least condemnable type of Trump supporter, right? Because you mean well, you really believe, you understand the Trump policies, you get what he's proposing, you like it more than what Hillary Clinton proposed, and that's why you voted. You just don't understand a lot of the broader concepts that would explain to you why these are genuinely bad ideas in many cases. I'm still going to judge you for being a voter that doesn't understand the background and many of these broader issues and didn't engage enough to do your research. But again, these are not ad hominem judgments, so to speak. I would say that in general, you have three types of Trump supporters that fall into that last camp, which is you mean well, you just believe that the Trump policies will genuinely be better for the country than the Clinton policies. Those are traditional Republicans, right? You usually vote Republican in presidential elections. You maybe find Trump to be flawed or even obnoxious. You would have rather seen someone like Ted Cruz or Rubio or Jeb Bush on the Republican ticket, but you're going to vote Republican regardless because you genuinely believe that there is a more benefit to gain, to be seen by the country from a Trump presidency. You know this type of person, right? There's a lot of older folks, a lot of people from the South, a lot of blue collar people, people who are just lifelong so-called mainstream Republicans, people who were affected by the sort of maybe Clinton propaganda, et cetera. Okay, then there are those who don't really follow politics too much, but they've seen a lot of the propaganda around how Hillary's crooked, email stuff, maybe Benghazi, etc. And you voted Trump not because you love Trump, but because you really fell for the Hillary Clinton is corrupt stuff without realizing that any criticism you could make of Hillary Clinton, you could make 5 or 10-fold about Donald Trump. And this relates to the sort of, I hate to use the term, alternative facts or alternate realities that many Trump supporters are living in. They've really been bamboozled, not in terms of Trump policy, but in terms of who Hillary Clinton was. Very, very common in 2016. These are the types of people where if you ask, why did you vote for Trump specifically? What policies do you like? Instead of listing policies, they say, he tells it like it is. He's not afraid of offending people. He's cutting to the chase. He's not a standard politician. Hillary Clinton, far from a perfect candidate in many ways. I've said it since the beginning of the primary. Baggage, changing of positions, pandering, apparent lack of sincerity. A lot can be said about why Hillary Clinton turned off voters, but she was exponentially more qualified than Donald Trump, exponentially more experienced, far better candidate than Trump in every way. There's nothing you could criticize Hillary Clinton over that you couldn't criticize Trump for way more significantly. So maybe I shouldn't actually, because I share sometimes, I also, when someone says I voted for Trump, I immediately say, well, which one of these categories do you fit in? Because you fit into one of these categories, no doubt. I also sometimes will feel guilty, but then I realize, maybe I really shouldn't feel guilty about it. Look at the disasters that Trump has already committed in the early days of his presidency. Each and every Trump voter is to blame, no matter how they ended up on election day or whatever day it was that they voted, saying, yes, I'm voting for Trump. They are one of those voters that is responsible for what we now have in the White House, the first orange president of the United States. Send me your thoughts on this, and please react to what I actually said, not to what you might have heard, which is I'm insulting Trump supporters or all Trump supporters are bad people, because that's not what I said. If you need to listen to or watch the clip over again before responding, by all means, please do that. Okay, I told you yesterday that Donald Trump met for the first time with congressional lawmakers, used it as an opportunity to again parrot this widely debunked, bogus, fake notion that 3 to 5 million undocumented immigrants voted for Hillary Clinton, and that only because of that did Donald Trump lose the popular vote on paper. Number of investigations into this, mostly Republican secretaries of state around the United States have said, no, we have no evidence of this voter fraud that Donald Trump is talking about. There never has been significant voter fraud in the way that Donald Trump talks about. A notable case actually was of a Republican getting caught, as Pat mentioned yesterday, a Republican who was trying to prove some kind of point by voting twice. She actually got caught and she was arrested for it. Trump press secretary Sean Spicer was asked to justify what Donald Trump said. He was completely unable to. Check out this non-defense when he was asked for evidence.
The president does believe that. He has stated that before. I think he stated his concerns of voter fraud and people voting illegally during the campaign. And he continues to maintain that belief based on studies and evidence that people have presented to him.
But exactly what evidence?
Speaker
Ryan today said there's no evidence. The National Association of Secretaries of State say that they don't agree with the president's assessment. What evidence do you have?
As I said, I think the president has believed that for a while based on studies and information he has.
Based on studies and evidence that Trump has, which I won't name, this is what he's believed. So Sean Spicer doubled down on the comment, and then now Trump is tripling down on the comment, calling for a major investigation. Here's 2 tweets Trump sent in the recent hours back to back. Quote, I will be asking for a major investigation into voter fraud, including those registered to vote in 2 states, those who are illegal, and even those registered to vote who are dead, and many for a long time, depending on results. We will strengthen up voting procedures. Strengthen up voting procedures. I'm going to talk about that in a second. Hey, what about fiscal conservatism, Pat? A major investigation into something that's been looked into countless times already. It doesn't sound cheap. And I thought this was the party of fiscal responsibility.
Well, it's also just funny how Trump and his surrogates have been going around the past couple months claiming they won the election in this big landslide and that they have this big mandate. But now he's questioning the legitimacy of his own election. I mean, which one is it, Donald?
Yeah, I'm going to get to that because that's fascinating. And we know exactly what will happen with this investigation. They'll find a few random sporadic cases of so-called voter fraud, some recently dead people who are still on the voter rolls, some college students who were registered to vote both in the state they grew up in and in the state where they're going to college, even though they only actually voted one time. And then they will use these completely sporadic and insignificant instances of, quote, voter fraud to increase voter ID rules, make it even harder for people to vote. Trump will claim to be vindicated. That's what's going to happen. And look at what Republicans have been able to pass in terms of voter ID without a presidentially demanded investigation into voter fraud. Even if the investigation turns up 10 instances of so-called voter fraud, double registrations or dead people on the rolls, etc., it will be used to justify more restrictions. And who will be hurt by that, Pat? Progressives.
And you got to love how Sean Spicer's not providing any evidence whatsoever. One of the biggest pieces of evidence we do have on this topic comes from the Brennan Center of Justice, and they found that from 2000 to 2014, there were 31 instances of voter fraud out of a billion votes cast.
Yeah, 31 over a 12-year period. And think about the Trump back and forth. This is where it just gets great. Before the election, Donald Trump saying, hey, the election is rigged. This is a rigged election. Then Donald Trump wins the election. Donald Trump says the election was not rigged. I'm a legitimate president. He then finds out that his popular vote deficit has been growing and growing and growing to nearly 3 million votes. Now it's rigged again, where 3 to 5 million undocumented immigrants voted. Oh, but Russia was accused of hacking the election. Russia influenced the result. Trump goes back to, nope, not rigged. I won fair and square. It's all good. Then he gets inaugurated and people see him as illegitimate. And there's a number of insiders who are saying Trump's really panicking because he sees that many voters see him as illegitimate. Now the election's back to rigged according to Donald Trump because of these 3 to 5 million non-existent votes by undocumented immigrants. What do you do if you're another Republican? You control the White House, House, and Senate. And the president is talking about widely debunked voter fraud conspiracy theories. It's important to remember the information warfare, which is effectively what all of this alternative fact stuff is from the Trump administration. It's not necessarily about creating an alternate truth that they want everybody to believe. It's about eroding the average person's ability to know what's truth and what's propaganda. It's not propaganda in the sense that if the average person doesn't know what to trust, it's all possible. And that is really the underlying damage that this entire alternative fact, repeating widely debunked and provably false narratives, that's the danger of that. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day supporting independent progressive media is Jordan LaFond. Jordan, thank you so much for your support. You can join Jordan and get all the great member benefits, including the members only bonus show, which we produce every day for you, at davidpakman.com/membership. If you want a discount off of membership, use the coupon code IVoted17. I don't mind. And remember, if you ever shop on Amazon.com, stop by davidpakman.com/Amazon before shopping. Then everything you buy will send us a little kickback. All right, we are in the Trump era of Hatriot Mail. A quick reminder of what Hatriot Mail is.
Because it's God's divine plan that every child be born, but an act of patriotic duty to snuff that bastard if he sets a foot near your stuff. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
Yes, here is an analysis from a Hatriot about libel lawsuits and so on and so forth. Let's take a listen.
Are you for real, David Pakman? You can't even see how ridicule you are. Your show should be closed down, you moron, and I hope Trump does with libel suits. How much is Soros paying you to be his bitch? You despicable c***. This is unbelievable. End of. As to you, homo, go and grab some pussies.
I love how usually these Hatriot mails will include your,
Yes.
Y-O-U-R, when it should be U''RE.
This is different.
This may be the first time where we've seen U''RE when it should be Y-O-U-R, actually.
I was actually going to make that exact same point, so
Yeah.
now I have to make another one,
Yeah.
which is the last sentence there. If you actually are gay, why would you want to go out and sexually assault women as our president did?
It doesn't really make any sense,
No.
right? No, you wouldn't do that because you're not attracted to women, right? Okay, funny how the free speech, always above all else crowd has no problem with Trump wanting to sue media outlets he doesn't like. Remember, you can turn Hatriot Mail into something positive with the coupon code Hatriot40. We'll give you a huge discount off of membership at davidpakman.com/membership. Well, the world is laughing at us, Pat. Yesterday, on just his 5th day in office, President Trump largely canceled out the efforts of President Obama and many environmentalists when he signed executive orders to revive construction of the Keystone XL and Dakota Access pipelines. Also, executive orders to minimize environmental regulation of other infrastructure projects. Totally and utterly plutocratic, oligarchical, retrograde nonsense. And the debate around whether or not to build Keystone XL has been going on for years. President Obama rejected it in 2012 because of completely valid concerns about emissions and spills and disturbances of land and water resources. Here's Trump making a big deal out of signing this, like he's some kind of hero for doing this.
This is with regard to the construction of the Keystone Pipeline, something that's been in dispute, and it's subject to a renegotiation of terms by us. We're going to renegotiate some of the terms, and if they'd like, we'll see if we can get that pipeline built. A lot of jobs, 28,000 jobs, great construction jobs.
Yeah. By the way, how weird are these little videos when Trump invites in the media to narrate himself signing stuff? I mean, truly, just the ego is on display there. By the way, he talks about jobs. Construction of the pipeline would create some temporary construction jobs, but even the State Department says it would have no significant impact on long-term employment. Solar power plants, for example, they can employ people too. And we all remember the recent protests by the Standing Rock Indian Reservation and others in solidarity with them against the building of the Dakota Access Pipeline. It violates treaties with the federal government. It poses huge threats to the environment and archaeology. And then here is Trump signing another executive order to try to move forward with the Dakota Access Pipeline.
This is with respect to the construction of the Dakota Access Pipeline. Dakota Access Pipeline.
Yes.
Again, subject to terms and conditions to be negotiated by us.
Both projects were halted. Both may be on their way to completion now. Of course, Obama rejected the Keystone Pipeline because it carried tar sands crude oil. which releases a particularly large amount of climate-changing greenhouse gases. We already know Trump thinks climate change is a hoax. And within hours of the inauguration, the Trump administration announced its plan to eliminate the U.S. Climate Action Plan. I referenced this a couple times. He has this thing called the America First Energy Plan. The world is laughing at us. Europe, countries like China and India, they're leading the world in new energy, renewable energy. We've got Rick Perry set to lead the Department of Energy. We've got the former CEO of Exxon set to be our Secretary of State, while Trump turns back the clock with American energy and wants a fast lane to destructive energy that won't even really create jobs.
And perhaps not surprisingly, there's a conflict of interest angle here too, because Donald Trump has a $1 million stake in Energy Transfer Partners, which is Dakota Access's parent company. He claims to have gotten rid of those stocks,
but who knows?
We don't know for sure.
We have no idea.
Also, their CEO donated $165,000 to his campaign.
Oh yeah, there's a big quid pro quo going on there. China makes a pact to fight climate change with European nations at the World Economic Forum last week. Chinese President Xi Jinping says that the Paris Agreement is a milestone and that we must make sure it doesn't get derailed. India building the world's first large-scale, unsubsidized CO2 conversion unit, which saves 60,000 tons of CO2 per year. They've built the largest solar energy plant. We've got the EU bank investing billions a year to fight climate change. And the Trump administration wants to revive coal and build pipelines. We want to beat China, according to Trump. We want to win again. But Trump is pushing fossil fuel pipelines. Doesn't anybody realize that we are the past and China and India are the future on this? We are falling behind. Funny also that despite being against President Obama's use of executive actions, Donald Trump is going completely nuts with executive actions. I'm sure that's different, but take a break. Back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
We're continuing with Richard Spencer, who's the editor of altright.com, president of the National Policy Institute. He says he's okay with the term white nationalist about himself. We've been talking about that. Richard, what are your views on Jews? And let me contextualize it in this way. When I interviewed Glenn Miller, who now is on death row for having tried to kill Jews at 2 Jewish community centers in Kansas, ultimately ended up killing Christians, but his intent was to kill Jews. When I interviewed him in 2010, he said that he personally hated me, even though he didn't ever meet me, merely because I am Jewish. And it was sort of it had nothing to do with anything I had done. Just by being Jewish, I was a problem to him and we could not get along. What's your view on that? I mean, are you able to hang with Jews? Or if not, if there is, as you mentioned in our first segment, such a sort of incongruency between European whites and Jewish identity, what's tough about just hanging out with Jews? Like, how does it manifest itself?
No, I would certainly strongly disagree with those sentiments, and I would obviously strongly condemn the actions that he allegedly engaged in.
Well, he's been found guilty. There's no allegation. It's not alleged. He's on death row.
He's been convicted of. He's been convicted of.
Good.
Sure. No, I have a very different perspective. On a personal level, can I get along with you? Can we go have a beer? Of course we can. We're having a productive discussion right now. But the thing is, we aren't just mere individuals. I have people that I respect who are Asians. I've had interesting conversations with people of African descent. I can get along with them. But what we really need to think about these things are on a communitarian basis. Are societies that are biracial or multiracial, is this a way to achieve happiness first? And is this a way to achieve true flourishing? And I would say absolutely not. Biracial and multiracial societies are going to ultimately fragment and are going to ultimately end in chaos, and they're going to end in blood and tears.
And how would that ultimately manifest? Like, let's just carry out our example, right? So like, I'm Jewish, you see Jewish identity as fundamentally incompatible longer term with European white identity, and consider yourself a white nationalist, have talked about this peaceful ethnic separation, etc. So if we're hanging out, talk to me about the next step, at which point it would become a problem for us.
It becomes a problem on a group level. It doesn't necessarily need to become a problem on an individual level. As I said, I can talk with civilized people of all sorts of backgrounds. But if we look at the history of Haiti, if we look at the history of just Jews in the United States, the fact that you still understand yourself as a Jew means that your family, your community has resisted assimilation. I understand why you want to resist.
And in what ways? I mean, in what ways have I? Let's break this down. I want to really break this down.
No longer be a Jew.
In what ways have I resisted assimilation beyond just saying I'm a Jew?
True assimilation would mean that you would not say that you are a Jew. True assimilation would mean intermarriage, the loss of your identity, your religious identity, and your ethnic identity. That is what assimilation will ultimately entail. And you have resisted that. I understand why you would want to. I understand why you would want to maintain your family and your traditions. I respect you for it.
Sure, but beyond saying that, by merely mentioning that I'm Jewish, I've resisted assimilation, beyond just the sort of signaling of identity, is there any practical way in which I've not assimilated into American society?
You've obviously assimilated into American society to a great extent. We're speaking English. I'm sure you like a lot of the same things that Americans like in terms of minor things. But the fact is, Jews in the United States have a precise identity. They understand themselves as Jews. They see the world very differently than a white person in Wyoming or Mississippi. You have a different consciousness of the world. The Jewish experience in the United States, in North America, has been very different from the experience of my people, from the experience of other Europeans.
But what would be an example of that, Richard? So obviously, I'm likely to have, as a Northeast liberal, I'm likely to have significant political differences with someone from Wyoming, for example. But aside from political differences that we could have, regardless of whether I'm Jewish or not, in what ways are we fundamentally at odds?
The Jewish experience in the United States has been a fraught one. It is certainly one that has involved anti-Semitism on the behalf of many groups, on behalf of elite groups. There used to be a kind of WASP elite class that was, to a large extent, although not 100%, anti-Semitic or at the very least aware of Jewish identity. They wanted to prevent Jews from entering institutions, although they ultimately backed down on that matter. The Jewish experience has also been different in the sense that it's been kind of conflicted, you could say.
Yeah, but Richard, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm really trying to drill down with our audience for, you initially said, I've assimilated enough to be able to sort of exist in American society, but that because of my Jewish identity, there are still significant areas of, I guess we could call them friction with, for example, someone from some European white person who lives in Wyoming. Without getting into historical generalities, aside from my political differences as a liberal with like a conservative from Wyoming, what specifically can you point to that makes it evident that we're just not really compatible?
I think what the problem here is that I actually am talking in terms of generalities, because history takes place in terms of generalities. It takes place in terms of nations and peoples and civilizations. You're talking in terms of individualism. If you came and had a beer with someone in Wyoming, I'm sure it would all be fine because you're a civilized, upright individual.
Yeah.
But the fact is, history doesn't work that way. We have this liberal bias where we want to see people as individuals, and that's a good thing in many ways. But it's not actually a good thing in terms of understanding history. Jewish consciousness, and I'm going to paint in broad strokes here because obviously we're having a conversation. Jewish consciousness in the United States has actually been deeply conflicted. It's on the one hand, it has pointed towards Israel as and I'm talking about the more recent Jewish experience. It's pointed towards Israel as a fundamental homeland, Israel has a claim on the heart of millions of Jews here in a way that it simply does not on any Gentile. That is a foreign power that has a claim on Jews here. That would simply not exist if this were a European Christian nation. This has often led to a kind of conflict in terms of consciousness, where elite Jews, intellectual Jews, have been at the vanguard of promoting many liberal and left-wing policies. They've been at the vanguard at promoting things like civil rights. They've been at the vanguard of promoting things like
civil rights.
Mass immigration.
Yeah.
What?
It's interesting to see this couched in this way, as if these are such incompatibilities. Jews, like many groups, have been at the forefront of promoting civil rights. I just am not seeing that even now, going from the individual to generalities, that these cause conflicts.
Israel? Are the same Jews that would promote mass immigration towards the United States and even towards Europe would not promote the same kinds of policies in Israel. The fact is, Israel is an ethno-state. It is a Jewish state. It is a Jewish nationalist order in the Middle East. Jews do not view the United States as that. And indeed, many Jews view someone like myself as inherently bad for the Jews, as hostile towards the Jews, because I have a different view of what the world should be than as a kind of liberal, mass immigration, multicultural world. Many Jews feel more comfortable in a world that is based on liberal ideology, based on civil rights, based on mass immigration. And they feel less comfortable in a world that is based on European identity, for the simple reason that even if Jews have assimilated to a great extent, they are still fundamentally Jews.
Okay. All right. Let's put a pause on this, just because I can tell we may not get further than we've gotten so far. I think people maybe have a sense of where you're coming from on this. Let's talk about this weekend, and I want to talk about Trump a little bit. So this weekend, you were at an inauguration-related event, and you were punched. Someone, while you were given an interview, actually came up and it basically, I think there's no other way to say it than just sucker punched you. It wasn't clear whether you even saw it coming. What exactly happened here, to the best of your understanding?
Yes, I was luckily not knocked out, but I have suffered a mild concussion. I have a busted eardrum. I mean, I'm going to be fine. I have a black eye, as you can see, but I'm going to be fine. But it was a physical assault. It was a totally outrageous one, because it was a sucker punch. I was looking the other way. The guy came out of nowhere and ran off. What happened is that I was actually with two photojournalists, and we kind of documented my experience at the inauguration. I was up fairly close, and then we were walking home, and I was actually. We were going to just walk to a restaurant. We were not walking towards any kind of protest, but we just happened upon this so-called black bloc protest. That is people who would identify themselves as anarchists. And while I was there was a woman who screamed my name out in pain, Richard Spencer, ah! And after that happened, people circled around me, and some of them were a bit impolite. They were screaming at me. There were a couple of people that I was actually talking with, and I've done this before, kind of engaging with enemies. There's some sarcasm and back and forth, but I actually will listen to them.
So you do see them as enemies.
That happened, and I'm adversaries, what have you. Of course, they're enemies. They fundamentally disagree with me politically. Yeah, sure.
Okay.
So I was, I was actually, while I was speaking with one, I think it's the same person who did this. He came out of nowhere and he actually punched me in the face, and it was a kind of glancing blow, even though it gave me a black eye. And then he ran off, which is what they always do. And after that happened, an Australian broadcast company came up and started speaking with me, and I was giving an interview to them. They were asking a couple questions. This guy, and I think it's the same person, he came back and he hit me in the side of the head. So, as is clear in this video that's, been retweeted a million times now, I was looking at the camera speaking, and he came out of nowhere and hit me with his forearm across the head. I was thrown back, and of course, he ran off again. So yeah, it was a totally outrageous sucker punch.
You were at the inauguration. When Trump says stuff like America First, for example, which is a slogan that the Anti-Defamation League has suggested he not use because of its references to anti-Semitic context in which it was previously used, etc. I mean, do you like hearing stuff like that from Trump?
Yes, I do. But it's a complicated matter. First off, America First was not an anti-Semitic group at all. There was a group called America First that opposed the United States entrance into the Second World War.
Yes, but on the basis that it was Jewish interests trying to pull the United States in for their own benefit. I mean, it was fundamentally anti-Semitic at its core.
It was not fundamentally anti-Semitic. I mean, we might just disagree with the
I think
historical interpretation here, but it was not fundamentally anti-Semitic. The acknowledgement that Jews have interests, that is not fundamentally anti-Semitic. I acknowledge that Cubans have interest. It's just being realistic. But anyway, no, I'm very happy to hear Trump say things like America First. We would not have heard that certainly from Barack Obama, but we wouldn't have heard that from Jeb Bush or Ted Cruz. So I think this is a positive development. I think the arrow of Donald Trump is pointing in the direction of identity politics, and I think that's a very, very good thing.
Okay, so on that note, and I really want to get to the nitty-gritty on this because there's so many different views on this from alt-rightists, so to speak. How much do you really think that is part of the white nationalist agenda might be accomplished under Trump? And the other question I have, and hopefully we can get to these somewhat succinctly, is how do you rationalize Trump having a Jewish daughter, son-in-law, and grandchildren with the identitarian identity politics stuff that is compatible with your white nationalism? Do you just sort of ignore that or excuse it?
I don't ignore it. All I'm saying is that Trump seems to be moving in this direction. Trump is not going to be a true alt-right president. Excuse me. He's just simply not going to be that. But is this movement, is his civic nationalism pointing in our direction? I would say yes, because history is pointing in the direction of identitarianism. Now, Trump, again, he is not a white nationalist. He actually explicitly said, in a rather cliched terms, I think Stephen Miller should up his game a little bit, to be honest, but whatever color we are, we all bleed red, white, and blue. You know, something from a 1980s action movie.
You hate that, right? I mean, that's just vile to a white nationalist.
It's not vile. It's rather lame, to be honest.
Okay.
But what he is saying is a kind of civic nationalism. I think Trump is, though he is kind of pointing towards identitarianism, I think in another level, and maybe in a primary way, he is a last gasp of American civic nationalism, a last gasp of the American civic nationalism of the mid-20th century. And that was, remember, an overwhelmingly white country. That was 85 to 90% white in terms of its population, but it was 100% white in terms of its culture, popular and high culture, and so on. He's gesturing towards that. Trump is retrograde in a way. He's trying to revive civic nationalism from the mid-20th century. I don't think that will work for a number of reasons. First off, I think a civic nationalist identity is impossible in a multiracial country. But I think more than that, civic nationalism of the Trumpian variety is viewed as unbearably white by non-whites, by many Jews, by many people who are left-wing or liberal. They view it quite correctly as an avatar. It's as an avatar of identity politics, as a kind of white America reasserting itself. So in this way, Trump is a white nationalist, so to speak. He's alt-right, whether he likes it or not. And I don't mean that in the sense that he consciously, explicitly agrees with me. He doesn't. But I mean that in the sense that his version of civic nationalism is just irredeemably white from the viewpoint of people who see the future of America as a kind of neutral platform for the world, as a multiracial, multicultural country that has a real identity of its own. So Trump is caught in this contradiction. He's trying to be raceless, but he's being extremely racial at the same time.
Well, I think you've explained very well how this analysis that while Trump is not a white nationalist, his rhetoric has really interested many white nationalists. So who better than a white nationalist to explain it to us? Richard, we are out of time, but real quick,
you're welcome.
I heard that will you denounce Adolf Hitler? I heard you don't denounce Adolf Hitler when asked about that.
National Socialism was a disaster. The 20th century was pretty much a disaster. From
but do you denounce the actions of Adolf Hitler?
I'm not going to play this game.
Oh, it's not a game.
You throw out historical figures and I denounce them. I mean, do you denounce Stalin? Do you denounce Pol Pot? I mean, look.
Yeah.
The National Socialist Germany. It's part of history. It's not who I am.
No, I'm not asking if Hitler is part of history, but so you don't denounce Hitler when asked, is what you're saying.
I don't play this game of denunciations.
Well, but
people.
Calling it a game is a game. That's a game. To call it a game
is
playing a game.
What?
To call it a game is playing a game. Do you condemn the KKK?
The KKK? I mean...
Yeah, you've heard of them, right? Or are you like Trump? You've not heard of them?
Yeah, I've heard of them. Look, the KKK, I mean, I don't know if we have time to talk about this. I mean, the KKK, the 19th century KKK, has nothing to do with where we are now. It's a historical thing. The Second Klan was not engaged in violence, by the way. It was a kind of Americanist group.
Okay, so you don't denounce them. That's okay. I mean, I'm just asking.
I'm not going to denounce these historical things that don't really have any resonance to where we are. If someone in my movement ever claimed that he was going to engage in violence, I would denounce him in a second. Absolutely.
All right. Well, we'll hold you to that.
I'm not going to be burdened by history.
Okay. Interesting reaction. I think that there's a lot to glean from that. Richard Spencer, editor of altright.com, president of the National Policy Institute. I think we've learned a lot today. I don't know that we've done much to foster better race relations, but ultimately we know that that's not really the goal of Richard Spencer. It's to achieve a peaceful separation, I think, is where we've determined you land. Is it fair to sum up in that way?
I disagree with everything that you just said, actually. I think having a respect... I think having a respectful, rational discussion is the best way for there to be good relations between people who have different views. Sucker punching me is not going to be the way to do it.
That we can agree on. I think it's good that we can end on the note, which is I agree. Sucker punching you on the street is not going to help anything or anyone. All right, Richard Spencer, thank you so much.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let me tell you a little story about backwards politics or the bizarro world, or call it what you want. President Trump froze government hiring earlier this week. And there was this campaign promise under the guise of saving money and reducing the deficit that he would indeed do this. He would freeze all new federal hiring. This is so transparently ridiculous, and I'm going to explain to you why. Sometimes people have to be hired because work needs to get done. And work is still going to need to get done by all sorts of federal agencies. If you have a federal hiring freeze, how do you get the work done? Well, there's two ways. Number one, you start paying overtime to existing employees, which is very, very expensive. Or number two, even more expensive and even more common, you start hiring contractors and consultants from outside companies to do the work who charge way more than government salaries. If I replace federal workers with contractors, I can accurately say I've reduced spending on federal wages, or at least I've not increased spending on federal wages. I might save $1 million in federal wages. But if I have to spend $1.2 million on contractors to replace the $1 million saved on federal wages, I'm increasing total spending. I'd still be sticking by my campaign promise of reducing or limiting spending on federal wages, but I'm not actually saving taxpayers' money. In fact, it's quite the opposite. And we have examples to look at. Have past federal hiring freezes been good policy? Have they been good economically or in any other ways? Shocker. No, they haven't been. Democratic President Jimmy Carter and Republican President Ronald Reagan both did similar hiring freezes. The Government Accountability Office examined them, and they determined, I know this might be shocking to some of you, that they don't work. Hiring freezes, quote, have little effect on federal employment levels. The report from the GAO added that these freezes, quote, disrupt agency operations and in some cases increase costs to the government. Also, just think about it from a completely common sense perspective. You've got employees and there's more work than they can handle. You can't hire new people because of a federal hiring freeze. So you bring in outside contractors to help with the work. Outside contractors aren't familiar with the organization and with the day-to-day processes, et cetera, and they can actually disrupt the work that is being done in a way that ends up costing even more money to get back to working order. It's all backwards, and of course, never far behind with the Trump administration, Pat, is the reality that the hiring freeze also will disproportionately affect women, minorities, and veterans since they represent a higher share of federal employees than the private sector. Save money by enacting expensive policies. What?
This is really just one of those Republican tactics that they always go back to. They pretend that they're going to either create jobs or save money, and it turns out that the bill is actually counterproductive to those goals, and really it's about just playing into corporate interests.
It's also sort of a distraction because there's not been a big increase in federal employment. I know that the right likes to think that government is completely out of control in terms of hiring and hiring. Check out this graph, which shows the federal civilian workforce as a share of total civilian non-farm workforce. It's basically been on a steady decline since it peaked shortly after at the end of World War II. This just isn't even an issue, even though Trump press secretary Sean Spicer has lied about that as well, saying there's been a, quote, dramatic expansion of the federal workforce. This is policies that do the opposite of what they're supposed to do based on lies about what the problems even are. That's kind of a slogan, I guess, for the Trump administration. Solutions that don't work to problems that don't exist. That should be a bumper sticker or something. I kind of like that. Okay, let's talk about the EPA. Donald Trump is very, very quickly moving us in the direction of the world laughingstock when it comes to climate change. We talked about Donald Trump basically erasing the climate record and policies of the Obama administration from the White House website within minutes of being inaugurated on January 20th. Donald Trump has signed 2 executive orders to try to push the Keystone XL and Dakota Access pipelines. Donald Trump has 50 mentions on his Twitter account that climate change is a hoax, some of them specifically created by the Chinese. He has appointed or did appoint Myron Ebel to guide the EPA transition, who is a total climate denier. And then now we know about the guy appointed to run the EPA, Scott Pruitt, who has actually sued the EPA 14 times. He still hasn't been confirmed. No vote has been scheduled yet for Scott Pruitt. And the new phase of this war against science is that 2 EPA employees have confirmed to Reuters that Donald Trump's administration has instructed the EPA, which remember stands for Environmental Protection, to remove the climate change page from their website. Trump administration official asked for comment about this. They didn't comment. Well, I guess the upside, Pat, is even if we destroy the planet, in the meantime, we're going to generate some great investment returns for shareholders of fossil fuel companies.
Or I guess the other hope here is that even though the leadership in the EPA has changed and people in charge now are people like Scott Pruitt, the people on the ground are mostly the same well-educated scientists, people who have an understanding. So I think there could be an imbalance there, and that could cause some unrest in the agency.
Yes and no, because remember, the Trump transition team wanted to know who across all of these federal agencies worked on climate change related stuff. They were asking for names to be named. And there's also been a number of different Trump staffers who said, it's perfectly logical to get rid of staffers at the lower levels of these agencies if they don't agree with your philosophy. So that could change.
And they've been frantically trying to save some of the data. I'm trying to find a silver lining here, David.
There really isn't one. I mean, there really isn't one. Trump said, we're going to be transparent. I'm going to be draining the swamp and be super transparent. Meanwhile, a ton of climate data was also removed from the EPA website. This is taxpayer-funded research that was available on the EPA website. It's gone. Both parties are the same, though. Remember, Hillary and Trump are no different. If these first few days of Trump have told us anything, it's that the entire Trump and Hillary would all effectively be the same narrative is totally and completely bogus. Is there a single Democrat who would order climate science data removed from the agency charged with environmental protection? This tells us how extreme Donald Trump is compared to everybody else. 219-2-DAVID-P is our voicemail number. Here is feedback to our interview with Richard Spencer, the alt-right white nationalist. Take a listen.
Hey, David, this is Kevin from Louisiana. I just listened to your interview with Richard Spencer, and he might be one of the most articulate morons I've ever heard in my life. He seemed to be very confused between genetics, of skin color, culture, and religion. He couldn't seem to tell the difference between either one of those three. Anyway, love the show, man.
Yeah.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Yeah. Another one was educated neo-Nazi was another bit of feedback to Richard Spencer. Yes, I'm going to talk tomorrow more about the repercussions from that interview. There have been some. I'm out of time. It's a great bonus show today. Trust me, folks. Trust me. DavidPakman.com/membership. Coupon code I voted 17 if you'd like a discount.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.